This story happened in Colombia and contains a terrible truth. The woman my father abused, the story of Alba Nadia Aris. Alba Nadia Aris, a woman from Colombia, endured a horrific reality. She was repeatedly abused by her own father. Her story, one of the most infamous and horrifying in Colombian history, reveals the devastating impact of incest and the struggle to escape a life of captivity. This is the story of Alba Nadia Aris, a woman who, despite facing unimaginable hardship, built a new life for herself and her children. Her abuser, Arsenio Alvarez Quantera, escaped justice for years, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Little is known about Arsenio's early life. At the cusp of adulthood, he began a relationship with a woman who gave birth to his daughter. This woman died in 1979, leaving Alba Nadia, then around 5 years old, in his care. Alba, as she was later known, and Arsenio moved in with relatives. It was here that the abuse began. He subjected his young daughter to harsh treatment, which went beyond strict discipline and occasional outbursts of anger. When Alba was just 13 years old, she gave birth to her first child, a son who was also her half-brother. This tragedy, however, seemed to matter little to her father. He was in fact pleased by the birth, as the child was his own. Arsenio later moved his children to San Sebastián de Morocuita, a town in Colombia known as the fruit capital. The family eventually settled in a small village called Bariquis La Cabana, where Arsenio, like many locals, worked on a farm. The family lived in a dilapidated house, and by this time Arsenio had 4 children with his eldest daughter. The community didn't seem to find this unusual, perhaps thinking it was simply a father raising his children. For a while, the neighbors perceived the family as normal, though they kept to themselves. Alba was a quiet girl, interacting only with her father and her children. She rarely left the house alone, perhaps due to her father's presence. Neighbors noticed that Alba, despite her young age, didn't attend school, but no one questioned her or her father. The truth became horrifyingly apparent when Alba became pregnant again. It was clear that her father was the only possible father of her children, and she had no other contact with men. Despite the obvious signs of abuse, no one reported Arsenio to the authorities. The community became unwitting witnesses to the repeated sexual abuse of Alba. Over 20 years, Alba endured at least 11 pregnancies. Some children were born prematurely and died shortly after birth. Alba never gave birth in a hospital and rarely sought medical help. Of her 11 children, only 8 survived, 3 boys and 5 girls. Only Alba could read and write, having been taught by her father. The other children were denied this opportunity. From birth, the children's basic rights were violated. They were not officially registered, had no birth certificates, and were not enrolled in school or vaccinated. Local residents said they could have helped Alba or at least spoken to her, but they chose not to. Instead, they openly condemned Alba for sleeping with her father, as if she had a choice. Alba, hardened by years of abuse, never responded to their harsh words. She remained silent. Arsenio had broken her spirit. She never dared to defy him or condemn him for his actions. Despite this, the neighbors described Arsenio as a strict but decent man. They feared him, afraid of what he might do to them. Over time, the incestuous relationship became normalized, an open secret known to everyone in the village. Occasionally, officials from the local education office and church representatives visited the family's home. They urged Arsenio to allow his children to attend school and live normal lives, but their visits were futile. They seemed oblivious to the children's lack of legal documentation and the clear signs of incest. Arsenio seemed to have a charmed life, and the authorities paid no attention to him or the situation. If things had continued as they were, Alba and her children would have remained trapped in their nightmare. But change came when Arsenio crossed the line. Alba stated that her father had grown cold towards her and began showing interest in one of his other daughters. He also pressured his sons to follow in his footsteps. This sparked a new fear in Alba. She had given up on her own life, sacrificing herself, but she could not allow her children to suffer the same fate. Some might say it was divine intervention that brought an end to Arsenio's crimes. Arlanda Marin, a pastor from International United Pentecostal Church, made regular trips to small towns and villages. During one of these visits, he learned about Alba and her situation. This became a turning point in her life. She found support in Orlando, opening up to him. The pastor urged Alba to take her children and leave the house, but the years of oppression had left her unable to make decisions. She knew nothing but the abuse she had endured since childhood. Something, however, gave her the courage to defy Arsenio. Around the same time, the world was horrified by the case of Elizabeth Fritzl, who was held captive by her father, Joseph Fritzl, in the basement of their home for 24 years. During her captivity, Elizabeth gave birth to 7 children by her abuser. This case, which received global attention, sparked a desire to prevent such horrors from happening again. The fear that her father might abuse her children, coupled with hatred, drove her to act. She knew she was the only one who could protect them. She couldn't allow them to become victims of the monster they called father. Alba challenged Arsenio. In the past, he responded to defiance with violence, a strategy he had used for years to keep his children in line. But this time, things were different. Perhaps Alba's anger was so intense that it shocked Arsenio's confidence. He didn't react to her actions. With the support of most of her children, Alba left the place of her torment. It's important to note that 2 of her eldest sons sided with their father and remained with him. It's unclear what motivated their decision. Alba and her children went to Maraquita, where she filed an official complaint against her father for the first time. She initially accused him only of physical abuse, but after a few days she expanded her complaint, detailing years of abuse and sexual assault. Of course, the authorities needed to conduct their own investigation to verify her accusations. This process can take time, and law enforcement is not always swift. Time was a luxury Alba and her children didn't have. They were living in a rented house, and their savings were dwindling. They couldn't afford to lose their home, and Alba struggled to find work. One hardship followed another. Fortunately, Alba found a job at a local restaurant. She worked 15 hours a day to provide her own children. Meanwhile, the authorities seemed to be making no progress in the investigation, wasting precious time. This made Alba and her children's situation even more difficult, as they didn't receive the support and assistance they were entitled to. It seemed the Colombian authorities were not taking the case seriously. The only individuals who took action were representatives from the Ministry of Family Affairs. They brought the story to the attention of local officials, who visited the house where Alba and her children had lived. They later shared some details of the story with the media, making it one of the most sensational cases in the country. The investigation focused on gathering evidence to corroborate Alba's accusations against her father. In January 2009, the authorities decided that they had enough evidence to file criminal charges against Arsenio. The Attorney General's office ordered a full and thorough investigation into the crimes he had committed. In the second half of March of that year, officers from the Criminal and Judicial Investigation Corps brought an end to the abuser's impunity, which had lasted for years, poisoning the lives of his eldest daughter and other children. The operation to capture Arsenio lasted only a few hours. He was arrested on a sugarcane plantation where he had been hiding for months. In his first statement after his arrest, the elderly man denied forcing her daughter into a sexual relationship. He claimed that she wasn't actually his biological daughter, but adopted. He sought to refute the charge against him. After hearing her father's statement, Alba asserted that he was intentionally using the argument of her supposed adoption to justify his abuse. She reiterated that he had subjected her to horrific physical abuse and essentially held her captive for years. The most surprising statement from Alba was that she still considered Arsenio her father. She said she would continue to respect him despite everything. She even said she still loved him. Over the years, she had tried to reason with him, but to no avail. Her words were unusual, considering what she had endured. One might expect her to hate Arsenio, but she felt something different. In late March 2009, the first hearing in the case of Arsenio Alvarez Quintero took place. During the hearing, he maintained his version of events, claiming that Alba was not his biological daughter. He also stated that he and his daughter had agreed to love each other, implying that everything had happened with mutual consent. Of course, Arsenio failed to explain how he came to make such an agreement with a young girl. Remember, Alba was a child when this monster first committed his crime. Following the first hearing, Arsenio was transferred to a local prison. As he left the courthouse, he was met by an angry mob of citizens who wanted to punish him personally. Law enforcement officers intervened to prevent this. The public's attention to the case was expected, with national news outlets widely covering the investigation. This had a significant impact on people's perception of Arsenio, who became one of the most hated men in the country. He was dubbed the Monster of Maracuita, a title that fit his actions perfectly. For the first time in years, Alba felt safe. She could finally speak about her ordeal, though she did so in a concise manner. Despite all she had endured, she demonstrated resilience and kindness. Alba repeatedly stated that her greatest fear was being separated from her children. She couldn't imagine life without them. She also feared that her father would do to her children what she had done to her. She expressed outrage at the lack of support from the community who had condemned her. Their behavior made them complicit in the crime. The trial of Arsenio Alvarez Quintero, or the Monster of Maracuita, took place in 2009. It was a relatively swift trial. Unfortunately, much information about the trial itself is unavailable. It is known that Alba was the main witness for the prosecution. She once again recounted her story, doing everything in her power to ensure her father was sent to prison. The authorities were able to disprove the claim that Alba was not Arsenio's biological daughter, an argument he had used to justify his actions. It was also revealed that the Attorney General's office attempted to add additional charges against Arsenio related to sexual abuse of one of his minor daughters, but they were unable to prove the allegations. Media representatives were granted limited access to the trial. According to their accounts, Arsenio initially denied all charges, as he had done previously. However, towards the end of the trial, he confessed to his crimes and accepted responsibility for all charges. He even attempted to apologize to his eldest daughter and her children. In October 2009, the judge who was responsible for delivering the verdict finally brought the sensational case to a close, sending the Monster of Maracuita to prison. Arsenio Alvarez Quintero was sentenced to 15 years and 7 months in prison. This relatively lenient sentence was seen by both the public and the victim as an injustice. It was considered an insult and disproportionate to the severity of the criminal's crimes. Another surprising detail was the reduction of the sentence to 11 years and 7 months, which occurred a few months after the final hearing. The reasons of this leniency were never disclosed. Perhaps it was related to the convicted man's declining health. Following the trial, Alba and her 6 children were moved to a social shelter in the city of Bogotá. The authorities believed that this would allow them to start a new life, far from the place that constantly reminded them of their past. The fate of the 2 sons who had chosen to remain with their father is unknown. Arsenio was soon transferred to a maximum security prison in a place called Picalena. However, in 2011, the prison administration reported that he had died. According to available information, a few weeks before his death, he was admitted to a local hospital for a scheduled surgery and to monitor his blood pressure. During the surgery, his gallbladder was removed. Initially, the medical team believed the surgery was successful, but after returning to prison, he died suddenly. The guards found his lifeless body in one of the cells. The report stated that his death was due to natural causes. In conclusion, we must once again acknowledge the resilience shown by Alba. She fought for her life and the lives of her children, and she ultimately prevailed. She spent years earning for freedom but lacked the courage to claim it. After finally escaping the clutches of her father, the only thing she truly cared about was her children. The most important advice Alba could give to other victims of similar crimes is to speak out. Her silence for so many years was, in essence, a perfect accomplice to her father. Thank you for watching. Our video has come to an end. If you want to see more interesting content, subscribe to our channel and press the bell to not miss the new release.